The presenting sponsor of the BloodStream podcast is...
Takeda.
And for that we say...
Thank you, Takeda.
Thanks, Takeda. Hello, and welcome to the BloodStream podcast, episode 35, April 15th, 2019. I'm Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
On this episode, World Hemophilia Day is April 17th, and both Dr. Glenn Pierce and Dr. Asad Hafar from the World Federation of Hemophilia join us to discuss in our interview segment. Molly Livingstone contributes her Raising Kids with Hemophilia in Israel piece as this month's Share segment. Debbie De La Riva's back with Amy Board for our A Moment for Mental Health segment. We touch on Canada's troubled history enacting Medicare for All during the comment segment, and the seldom discussed impact that miscarriages can have on men during our Like segment. All that, plus Mama Sue's Netflix Rex and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to BloodStream.
So you just got back yesterday from where?
From the Hemophilia Federation of America's annual symposium in San Diego, California.
And I was very jealous that you were there and I was not there.
I was there. A lot of our friends were there. There were beautiful boats. It was a beautiful marina. It was a really good meeting.
You mentioned that you came back feeling whole. What was the best part of the meeting for you?
Well, it's funny. Best is a funny word because it was actually a really emotional meeting for me. There's a remembrance ceremony every year that takes, just about an hour to remember those who have passed. But I'd say between that, the Blood Brotherhood rap session where there was maybe like 70 or so of us, and then a lot of conversations I had with people. Since I started talking about mental health a lot, people want to talk to me about mental health a lot. And we this came up on the podcast. It was like, I don't want to talk about this, but I accept that that's what's going to happen. And so I wind up in a lot of conversations about mental health, which is valuable and exhausting. So
sure,
I'm tired, but I came back feeling very whole, and I had a lot of great conversations, and it's real conversations. When you're talking to people about mental health, it's like real talk stuff. So I appreciate that always. And I got to see and get a little bit of FaceTime with a lot of people who I care about. So it was a great meeting.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most valuable parts of these meetings and conferences is the FaceTime with the community, right?
Yep.
Like connecting and, this Believe particularly didn't have big programming or responsibilities.
No
so you got to enjoy this conference as Patrick.
Yeah.
It's kind of been a while since you've done that. So
yeah, it was nice. That was a nice pace to have. And like sometimes it was okay to just kind of go back to the room and either call it early or, take a time out. It wasn't just running from one thing to another and trying to squeeze a costume change in there. So yeah, it was a really...
That's good for your mental health.
It is good for my mental health. My mental health was very thankful for that. So yeah, and good job, HFA. Congratulations on the meeting. It was an anniversary meeting for them. Oh, and there was a nice history exhibit as well that they'd put together, which again was an emotional thing to kind of look through and go through. And I was thinking about Robert Cooper's Unspeakable series and sort of the timeline that tracks from the Canadian perspective against the timeline that HFA's obviously American
perspective.
Tracks. And yeah, it's heavy. It's a lot. But
what anniversary was it?
25th anniversary of the Hemophilia Federation of America. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah. So a couple other pieces of info before we jump into the heart of the episode. We have our Empowering Women series, which if you're subscribed to the BloodStream podcast, you've gotten the first 2 episodes in your RSS feed. If you're not, number one, you got to make sure to subscribe to the BloodStream podcast.
Come on.
How many times do we have to ask? You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all the places. The first 2 episodes of this Empowering Women's series have come out already. The next and the final of the 3 will come out Monday, April 22nd. So make sure to give that a listen. Share it with people in your life you think could benefit from the stories, perspectives, points of view that are shared in there. The latest episode of the Ask the Expert podcast, it features Bruce Barnum, who's a former staffer for Senator Al Franken, to talk about the legislative process, advocacy, and the importance of storytelling in advocacy and making policy level change. So that's a really great episode over on the Ask the Expert podcast, which again, you can find in all the usual places. And then we're going to have another episode coming out through the BloodStream podcast. A very busy April for the BloodStream podcast in just 2 days on Wednesday, which is April 17th, World Hemophilia Day. And that episode is going to kind of give you an overview of all the other things going on within BloodStream Media and Believe Limited. It's a very busy time of year for us as we're ramping up for basically all the activities that will be embarked on for the remainder of 2019. So we're going to take a moment. You're going to hear different voices from the Believe Limited team. Some voices you know from spots on podcasts or ads, some you might not, or maybe people that you've emailed with but have never actually heard from or spoken to. But you're going to hear from a bunch of us next, or on Wednesday in 2 days, to hear what we're up to for the remainder of 2019. As always, you can leave BloodStream and the Ask the Expert podcast a rating on iTunes. Those ratings help the indexing and help other people find the podcast. They go a long way, so please leave us a rating and Ask the Expert as well. You can subscribe, as we mentioned, to iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Share BloodStream on Facebook and on Twitter. Tell a friend, and of course, stay in touch. Let us know what you want to hear on this and future podcasts at facebook.com/BloodStream Media, at BloodStream Info on Twitter, or email us mailbag@BloodStreamMedia.com. We need to talk about men and miscarriages. The article from the HuffPost that is the basis of this month's Like segment. The Like segment, which is brought to you by Stop the Bleeding, the winner of the 2018 LA WebFest Award for Best Comedic Premise and nominated for a Norman Lear Imogen Award. Stop the Bleeding is a comedic and educational web series that uses humor to teach and stories to inspire people affected by bleeding disorders. From the importance of advocacy and prophylaxis to the effect of a blood disorder on siblings and family members, if it's a topic of importance to the bleeder community, chances are Stop the Bleeding has covered it. Visit stbhemo.com, where you can watch all 8 seasons of the award-winning comedy series for free. That's right, stbhemo.com, or you can check out STBHemo on Instagram for bite-sized videos, memes, and other show-related content. Natalie, we need to talk about men and miscarriages, but why?
We absolutely need to talk about men and miscarriages. And it's because miscarriages are a taboo, under-talked about subject. And in a recent study, it shows that Americans really aren't educated on how often they happen and the reasons why they happen.
How often are they happening?
20% of pregnancies end in miscarriage, and miscarriage is classified up to the first 20 weeks. So that's a baby, a spontaneous abortion of the baby. And that's another term for miscarriage, when the body just decides to end the pregnancy. And most of that is within the first trimester, the greatest amount, the first 3 months.
But 1 in 5 pregnancies end in miscarriage one way or another?
Yeah, and they even say, so the article says the conservative estimate of it is 10% in the first trimester, but that's not accounting for up to 20 weeks. First trimesters being the first 3 months. And then also many women miscarry before they even know they were pregnant. So there's really even no way to know, but a conservative estimate, 20% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. I mean, just knowing that is like, oh, wow, when that happens to a couple, they're certainly not alone.
Well, I think that the article seems to suggest that the research supports that too, right?
100%. So there are many reasons men don't present their grief in a way that others recognize.
Well, actually, before we go to men, does the article get into, or from your experience as a doula, how about women? How do women process their grief related to a miscarriage, as opposed to how women process grief in general? Do you know anything about that?
Very privately. It's even though in the last few years there's been more talking about it, more posting on social media, just kind of bringing an awareness to it, but it's still a very private thing. And
why do you think that is?
People feel, because there's lack of education around how frequently it happens and the causes for why it happens, I think people feel, in some cases, deep shame, or
like they did something wrong.
Yeah, like they did something wrong, or they're imperfect somehow.
Yeah.
And it's really just the body. A lot of times it's chromosomal. It's the body it's not a viable embryo, and the body makes the choice to not continue the pregnancy. And then men, on top of it, in general, men do not necessarily address their mental health issues as often as women do. They don't seek help as often as women do, and why
and they don't confine intimately in friends as often as well, right? Didn't we come across that information too?
And oftentimes the people who men confide in are their intimate partners. So that's why this becomes an even more compounded issue. So men feel like they need to be the rock in these scenarios, even though they're grieving the loss of a life. And I feel like men don't feel like they have the space to feel, or that they can. They really internalize, and that internalization leads to workaholic, drinking a lot. There's a lot of ways that this plays out to avoid processing these feelings.
It's interesting because there's internalizing, and then I don't know if this is related or not, but there's also a male default toward action. Right, and the article touches on that too. So if the male's instinct is to take action, action includes avoiding. Avoidance is a form of action. So whether it's diving into work or diving into substance, it's some form of I must do something in order to, as opposed to sitting and being with and working through and processing.
Especially in a situation too where you feel like you need to be the rock for your partner, action feels like a solve.
And might also be carrying shame that you had something to do with it. I think the article touches on someone who felt as though perhaps them driving in their sports car too fast had something to do with the miscarriage. If there's so little science to understand the myriad of ways a miscarriage can occur, and if both parties, but for the sake of this part of the conversation, the male feels as though that he has had a role to play in the miscarriage in some irrational way or otherwise. So there's that shame.
Sure.
Then there's the I need to be the rock thing. Then there's the habitual I don't have a network of intimate support people that I've built because I'm a typical guy. So you start to trace the ingredients, and it's of course men are handling miscarriages poorly, and it's affecting them. And it's interesting too that the article points out there's virtually no research.
No, and so it's all anecdotal. But to touch back on what you said, it's not that we don't have the science to know why miscarriages don't happen. We absolutely know. I mean, there's some unexplained, but there are a myriad of reasons that are studied of why this happens. The average American doesn't know these reasons.
Right.
So in a moment of grief, you're trying to come up with what happened. Why did this happen? We want the whys.
And as you mentioned, you're in a moment of grief. It's not a moment of rational, I need to go find that research that's somewhere. It's a moment of grief.
A lot of anxiety and depression that men feel after the loss of an unborn child is they don't feel entitled to. And they absolutely are entitled to. And I think this article just talks about how we need to make space and allow for fathers to be upset about reproductive loss. And this also extends to fertility issues. This extends to pregnancy. Just because it's not happening in your body doesn't mean that there's not an emotional process that you're going through. And it's important that that is recognized, and that men also feel like they're not alone in it, because there are many men who are going through this, and B, that there's space for them to have those feelings.
Well, thanks for bringing this up. This is a worthwhile article. Again, it comes from the HuffPost. We need to talk about men and miscarriage, and there'll be a link to it in the program notes. Thanks, Natalie.
You're welcome. This month's A Moment for Mental Health segment is brought to us by the Ask the Expert podcast. Did you know mental illness, depression, and suicide prevention was a topic covered by A Moment for Mental Health contributor Debbie De La Riva and former Ask the Expert host Chris Bombardier on episode 17? That's the kind of deep dive conversation with experts that you'll get on Ask the Expert. Click the link in the program notes to listen to Ask the Expert.
You got this. Stay with it. Stay with it. We're almost there.
Or search Ask the Expert podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
There it is. I knew you had it.
Welcome to A Moment for Mental Health. Mental health is a broad topic, and our goal in this segment is to break mental, emotional, and behavioral health down into its various pieces, and each episode to focus on just one or two of those pieces. Today, I'm joined by BloodStream contributor Debbie De La Riva, who is a licensed professional counselor with Mental Health Matters 2, based out of Houston, Texas. Thank you for joining us today, Debbie.
And thank you for the invitation.
Our topic this month is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT is a form of psychological treatment that has been demonstrated to be effective for a range of issues, including depression, anxiety disorders, alcohol and drug abuse problems, marital problems, eating disorders, and severe mental illness. Debbie, what is CBT and where did it originate from?
Yeah, CBT is a form of therapy that's based on some really simple principles, and that is that your thoughts and feelings and behavior are all interrelated and they're always influencing one another. And to continue that line of thought, the best way to alleviate emotional pain is to help people identify those types of thoughts that they're having that are either unrealistic or very unhelpful. It's also to help them figure out that behavior that is learned that's not working for them any longer, and then helping people find different ways of coping, specifically by training them to see their current situation in a different light. This has been around for quite some time. It came out in the 1960s when a psychiatrist, Aaron Beck, was studying depressed people. What he found is that they all had something in common, and that is the spontaneous negative way of looking at the world and looking at themselves. He theorized that the way to relieve emotional pain is to help people identify their thought pattern and substitute it for a way that's either more realistic or more helpful to the current situation.
Tell me a little bit more about the behavioral patterns. CBT is known to be effective in changing some of those patterns. How does that work?
Definitely. I think the best way to describe it is to give you an example. Let's say that someone who's living with depression is applying for a job. Well, if they're depressed, many times they have low self-esteem, and the thought pattern could be something like, I'll never get this job. There's other people who are more qualified. I was always told that I'm never going to amount to anything. That's kind of the thought process they have about even thinking about applying or interviewing for the job. The resulting feelings, as you can imagine, like anxiety and fear, hopelessness. And then, that you can easily see that how all that can translate into how somebody presents themselves in an interview situation. And so the whole idea is to help them identify those thoughts, challenge them, and substitute them for more empowering thought.
Debbie, that's fantastic. What a fantastic overview. We're out of time for today, but where can listeners who are interested in CBT go for more information?
Yes, it's always a daunting task to find a therapist. And so one of the websites I found is really helpful is to go to Psychology Today. You can type in your zip code. You can even type in the type of therapy you want to undergo, in this case, which is CBT, and they'll give you a list of therapists in your area. Some people are not ready for therapy at this point. And what they can also do is go to a bookstore, and you can actually find a workbook on CBT and depression and anxiety, and work through the issues at your own pace.
Thank you again, Debbie. I'm looking forward to next month with our conversation, with our moment of mental health.
All right. Thank you again.
You bet.
Thank you very much, Debbie and Amy, for the latest installment of A Moment for Mental Health. And speaking of mental health, I mentioned at the top of the podcast how HFA Symposium, for me anyway, was very mental, emotional, health and wellness oriented with the sessions I attended and the conversations I was having. One of those conversations included discussion about a new program from the Wingman Foundation. It's called the Emotional Health Outreach Program from the Wingman Foundation, which is an organization that's made up of numerous people from within our community, including their president and CEO, Chad Brown, is a name that people in the community may recognize. Their goal is to bridge gaps for people with chronic conditions, and this program is intended to provide one-on-one emotional and mental health counseling services to people with hemophilia suffering from grief, loss, substance abuse, or any other form of trauma. There is a professional counselor who is connected to this program, a fellow by the name of Trevor Rye, and he has been working with Chad and others at Wingman to customize what this program would be for people in our community based on what some of the existing known needs are. And then, of course, everybody is different. But what I think that this program is particularly valuable for is that when you initially are looking for mental, emotional, behavioral health services, figuring out what's covered by your insurance, how it's going to be coded, how the billing process is going to go, and reimbursements, that can be such a nightmare. Natalie and I know about this firsthand. What this program does is it takes that away, and there is no charges to you as an individual for utilizing this program. There is funding to support the program now, and the idea is that the program will continue to grow. So if you are interested in some one-on-one emotional, mental health counseling, if you are suffering from grief, loss, substance abuse, or any other form of emotional trauma, get in touch with the Wingman Foundation. You can email them at info@wingmenfoundation.org if you'd like to learn a little bit more. That's info@wingmenfoundation.org, and that's men, M-E-N, plural. Or you can call or text anytime the number 321-236-0520. Again, 321-236-0520 to take advantage of the emotional health outreach program from the Wingman Foundation. So pretty cool new program rolling out by Chad with the Wingman Foundation. With that, do want to take a moment here to recognize that our presenting sponsor for the BloodStream podcast that lets us read about great things like the emotional health I had to read the title again just to make sure I got it right. The Emotional Health Outreach Program is Takeda. Takeda is the presenting sponsor of the BloodStream podcast. And for that, we say thank you, Takeda. Our next segment is our share segment, which will feature mom, Molly Livingstone, in a piece that she has titled Raising Kids with Hemophilia
in Israel.
Let's give a listen to Molly.
Raising kids with hemophilia in Israel. I grew up in LA as a typical Jewish kid. I would like to add that I counted myself lucky for not having any allergies, especially when it came to peanuts or bees at my sleepaway camp, Camp Shalom. When I was in college, I decided to go on Birthright, the 10-day free trip to Israel, because I had a camp counselor who was studying there and loved it. I thought, yeah, why not? It's cold in January, but I heard the Middle East is a desert and warm. I didn't realize I would fall head over heels for the country. First, literally head over heels, since I was on a bike and hike trip and managed to fall off my bike on almost every ride. But then the figurative love kind, where suddenly the world didn't make sense without me living in this country. And so that's what I did. I finished up college in Jerusalem, married an archaeologist. Mom joke, I really dug myself a hole. And after having a dog for a year, we thought it would be cool to start raising children. When our first son was born with hemophilia, I wondered how it would be to raise him in Israel. Now that he is 8.5 and we have a second son with hemophilia, I can answer for sure. I was a lucky kid with no allergies, and I'm a lucky parent to raise my kids with hemophilia in Israel. When I had my firstborn, Amichai, I didn't know what hemophilia was. I was in the hospital, and I remember he had a bit of blood from a standard test on his tiny little foot. That night, in his bassinet, I saw there was more blood. I thought that babies just bleed a lot. But as a mother, my instincts kicked in. I asked a nurse to come, and she informed me that babies don't bleed like that. Before I knew it, the doctors were running tests and assuring me they were checking for everything. I was in a fog of exhaustion and confusion. The next morning, I was told that my firstborn little boy had a condition called hemophilia. The doctors explained that it was no longer considered a life-threatening disease. He was going to be okay, and so was I. It was this early in Amichai's life that I saw the true blessings of raising hemophiliacs in Israel. There is universal health coverage, and we were immediately sent to the top hematologist who explained and answered all my ridiculous questions. Why, oh why, did I Google? We have always gotten Factor for free, and now that we are part of a clinical trial, we get it delivered to our door. At our local hemophilia center, we have access to the top doctors and professors for checkups and on speed dial. I can't tell you how many times I have sent a picture or question to a top hemophilia expert, and even if she is somewhere in the world at a hemophilia conference, she still responds to me. We also have a hemophilia nonprofit called ALAY that gives us access to any social workers, parent support groups, and special events for kids and families. Just recently, we went to the only mountain with snow on it and had a special day with Israeli soldiers, riding snow sleds, snow machines, and sledding down the hill. We have a great video of Amichai rolling off the sled. It's hilarious. As parents, my husband and I get a lot of support as well. We receive a monthly stipend from the healthcare system to help us with work that we may miss. We get compensated for additional days off as well as the usual sick days. It is for all of these reasons that I believe we are beyond fortunate to be raising children with hemophilia in Israel. And while it is not all rainbows, I do believe I have found my pot of gold. And that is because I can see the clouds, the rain, and the sun. I am lucky to know what it is to be healthy, what it is to have incredible health care, and how to raise a child to be their best self. despite a condition that may label them otherwise.
Here is Ozzy.
Oh, I forgot to bring
Hi,
it up.
say Ozzy. Hi. Hi.
This episode's share segment came to us from Breaking Through the Musical and Art Therapy Program, brought to you by Believe Limited and Bio Marin. You may have heard about Breaking Through's workshop and staged performance of Hemophilia the Musical last fall, and if you haven't, you're definitely going to want to check out breakingthroughhemophilia.com to see the video. But did you know that Breaking Through might soon be coming to you?
What?
That's right. This year, Believe Limited and BioMarin will be executing workshops on the therapeutic value of theatrical and visual arts for teens and young people at patient organization events around the country. To find out if Breaking Through is coming to your area, contact your local patient organization leadership. And if you are local patient organization leadership who would like to request a Breaking Through workshop, I think we might be full, to be honest, but you can email breakingthrough@believeltd.com. That's breakingthrough@believeltd.com. The episode 35 comment segment, the doctor's strike that nearly killed Canada's Medicare for All plan explained, an article from last month published by Vox. But before we dive into that, the episode 35 comment segment is brought to you by the Teen Impact Awards, held annually on the opening night of National Hemophilia Foundation's Bleeding Disorders Conference. Now entering its 5th year, the Teen Impact Awards honors leaders of the future by recognizing teens affected by bleeding disorders who are making a positive impact in their home, school, or community. It should really be and/or community. You're allowed to make impact all across the place. To watch video from last year's show featuring guest presenters such as NHF's Nicole Scappi, NFL Super Bowl champion Josh Gordy, Save One Life's Chris Bombardier, and many others, or to learn more about nominations for this year's program, they are starting very soon, head on over to teenimpactawards.com. That's teenimpactawards.com, or you can find the Teen Impact Awards on Facebook and on Instagram. All right, the doctor's strike that nearly killed Canada's Medicare for All plan explained. Before we dive in here, Natalie, do you have any initial reactions having just gone through the article together?
My initial reaction is that we're going through the same thing here in the United States, and it is mirroring what happened in the 60s in Canada. And if it was possible then, it's possible now. And you know what? Anything's possible if we want to make it happen. And there are barriers, but just like Canada had in the 60s.
Yeah, so the author of the article, Sarah Cliff, she points out how when the Affordable Care Act was passed, that obviously was quite a political struggle and battle, and a single-payer Medicare for all system would face much more resistance from insurance providers, from doctors, perhaps from biotech. There's going to be a lot of resistance to a wholesale change like that. So this article examines the idea: is it possible, or as the New York Times columnist David Brooks framed it, is the Medicare for All system in the U.S. a, quote, impossible dream? And I think the article kind of answers that question with no, it's not. And as Natalie was just referencing, it looks at the Canadian healthcare system, which is a very popular system. And it's pointed out in here in 2004, there was a nationwide survey, a nationwide study. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, they ran a primetime special, and they got millions of viewers to vote for who was the greatest Canadian. And the answer to that,
not a hockey player.
Not a hockey player. No, it was none other than Tommy Douglas, the father of Canada's healthcare system. And we learned the grandfather of Kiefer Sutherland. Fun fact about Tommy Douglas. But that's not why he won the most, important, pivotal, what did they say? The greatest Canadian of all time. Tommy Douglas won it for ushering in Canada's single-payer healthcare system that they are quite proud of. The history of the system is interesting. So in 1960, the Canadian province of Saskatchewan, they elected Tommy Douglas as their premier, the title of the person who runs the province. And
I like that title.
Right? Yeah. I'm the premier. Oh, hello. I am the inferior. And he had campaigned on this promise to bring universal insurance to his province. And despite a massive amount of resistance that included a 3-week-long strike from doctors and support groups of those doctors, KODs as they were referred to, Keep Our Doctors, there was a 3-week-long strike when this was legislatively fulfilled in Saskatchewan. But that strike did lose its momentum as people found that they were willing to kind of accept the shift into this new era. And that success in Saskatchewan set a model for success across the other provinces in Canada. And within, the British Columbia, they created a medical insurance program in 1965, so just a few years after it was first started in Saskatchewan. And within 10 years of the Saskatchewan doctor strike, all of Canada was covered with government-sponsored health insurance. So again, the article here from Sarah Cliff is looking at, is it an impossible dream to have a Medicare for all single-payer system in the United States? And she's comparing what happened in Canada to what's happening right now in the United States. And if we look at Canada in the 1960s, they were in a very similar position to where we are now. So, and voices in opposition of the government-sponsored program were very similar to voices in opposition of a government-sponsored national program now. So the point of the article, at least in my view, Natalie, tell me if you disagree, is that while it is hard, it is possible. And if people are willing to put the political will behind it and the organizational power and kind of go through the brutal challenge of how you move a country of 370 million people toward a system like that, it can happen. It'll be difficult, but it can happen. And I found it to be, it's a great read, an easy read, and I think it makes a really strong case.
Sure. And of course, taking into consideration, it wouldn't be without growing pain.
No, of course not.
So, and are we the same as Canada? Are we the same as Canada in the 1960s? No, but I think the people who are going to highlight all the differences and why that wouldn't work are just people whose interests are in keeping the system as it is. Like they're obviously, we aren't the same, but we mirrored what happened then, and it is possible, and it won't happen overnight, but they talked about the provinces, and also the article did mention giving a little power to states, right?
Yeah, that was a good point, how it was modeled in the provinces and then started to spread from there. And then 10 years from that initial passage and strike, it was all across Canada. And so, if you want to replicate that in the United States, you look at what's being happened on the state level, that might be a model that the federal government could then follow through with. People might remember that's actually part of the argument behind the Affordable Care Act. There was a system set up similar to the Affordable Care Act in its scaffolding, so to speak, in Massachusetts under Republican Governor Mitt Romney. So part of the Democratic argument against opposition to the Affordable Care Act was, hey guys, this was one of your ideas. This came from your Republican governor in Massachusetts trying to figure out how to account for people with pre-existing conditions and discrimination policies and making health insurance affordable for all people. We like that idea. We'd like to adopt it federally. So if we look at the passage of the Affordable Care Act, it followed a very similar trajectory as what happened in Saskatchewan and then the provinces to follow. Might we see a similar and I'm not an expert, maybe this exists already. Might we see a similar type model pop up in one of the 50 states on a state level that allowed for a single payer buy-in to a state market? I don't know structurally how that might work, maybe. And perhaps that becomes the model that we then start looking toward as we move from, because right now Medicare for all and single payer structurally, like there is a Medicare system, we know what it looks like from a federal standpoint, but how it would work on a broader scale for an entire population is still something that's quite daunting and across all 50 states. So it makes sense to me that we may see one or a small collection of states start to adopt a single payer option. And that's another piece too, and we're running a little long, so I should probably stop my ramble here. But there's the Medicare for all system or a single payer for all system. There's also the option, and you hear that conversation from some of the more centrist candidates in the 2020 Democratic field and from some of the more centrist conservatives and Republicans as well, that if there's a single payer option, that's different than a single payer system that everybody is a part of. Now, it comes with its own basket of challenges to have a single payer option for some that's not ubiquitously held by all, but it's another way in which we might find ourselves getting toward a future, that has a single payer option for the majority of Americans. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and I know we should wrap up this article, but another thing that the article touches on that is interesting is just a lot of the opposition for a single payer system in the United States is the financial engine that is insurance companies, that the jobs that would be lost. I mean, there is collateral.
There's about 500,000 jobs, right?
Yeah, and there would be collateral damage, but again, these are solvable things. Like, it's all solvable. And and I think they also mentioned that people's retirements being caught up in funds.
Mutual funds are very much so buttressed by these insurance stocks.
Right. So, there would be things that need to be considered and worked out. But the article is incredibly interesting and a pretty easy read.
It's an easy read. It's relatable. It makes this like really big, like Medicare for all, sometimes kind of scary sounding thing. It puts it into a very specific story of Canada in the 60s, makes it relatable, and you can kind of see how it played out somewhere else. So check it out. The link will be in the program notes, available in your podcast player as well on bloodstreampod.com. Moving into the episode 35 interview segment. Our interview segment this month actually includes 2 interviews. In honor of World Hemophilia Day, you'll be hearing my interviews with Dr. Asad Hafar, the Humanitarian Aid Program Director at the World Federation of Hemophilia, and Dr. Glenn Pierce, the Vice President of Medical for the World Federation of Hemophilia, with an impressive resume behind that. So you'll be hearing both of those interviews in that order in honor of World Hemophilia Day in just a moment. But before we get to that, I need to let you know that today's interview segment is brought to you by the von Willebrand disease series from Bloodline, created from over 25 interviews with patients, clinicians, family members, and advocates from all across the world. Bloodline's VWD series is a 3-episode podcast documentary that explores the simple yet surprisingly complex question, what does it mean to live with von Willebrand disease? You can stream Part 1, Diagnosis and Management, under the Episodes tab on bloodlinepod.com, or search for the Bloodline Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And now for the interviews with Dr. Asad Hafar and Dr. Glenn Pierce. All right, I'm joined now by Dr. Glenn Pierce. Good morning, Glenn. How are you?
Good morning, Patrick. I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, I'm doing well. I'm sitting in an office. It's very pleasant here. Not fighting the morning traffic in San Francisco as you are at the moment.
In a rainstorm.
Just to make it all the better. Where are you heading to this morning? What's keeping you busy this week?
Well, I'm heading down to Redwood City. I started a company this last year with Third Rock Ventures. I had been working on it for a couple of years before that, the concept of it. It's a liver regeneration company using cell and gene therapy to see if we can regenerate hepatocytes in people who have acquired liver disease, cirrhosis, and are in need of a new liver, but as you probably know, there's a huge shortage, and the majority of people who need a liver are unable to get one. So we're looking for different approaches to try to deal with that shortage and the risk of death that goes with shortages like that.
And was this kind of work something you had always wanted to do, or did it develop over did the interest develop over the course of your career?
Everything I have done has been done serendipitously. I got involved with Third Rock Ventures after I left Biogen and started working on regeneration concepts and began looking pretty quickly at the liver. The liver is a unique organ that can regenerate up to a point, and then it develops so much scar tissue. As we all know, the liver is a very important organ to detoxify the blood. So when it starts to fail, all your other organ systems also begin to fail. I have a vested interest in this since my liver did fail, and I required a liver transplant about 10 and a half years ago. That's given me a real appreciation for the unmet need that's out there and the severity of the problem as the liver does begin to fail. So I took the opportunity to really identify technology platforms and scientific founders and pulled all that together to develop this company called Ambis Medicines. Ambis, A-M-B-Y-S, stands for the genus of salamander that can regenerate its limbs and tail. And so that's what we're trying to do, except with the liver.
You mentioned your own liver failure, and I want to talk to you about your work at the WFH and what's happening at the Humanitarian Aid Program. But since you brought that up, I was curious as I was thinking about this conversation. You were cured of your hemophilia through the process of that liver transplant, and obviously not in the way that, say, gene therapy promises potentially to one day cure someone of their hemophilia. But I'm curious, in thinking about someone's identity as having hemophilia, one of the things we can forecast a little bit is what happens when that is no longer a part of your identity. How do you adjust on a psychological and emotional level to a very different way of identifying your place in the world? Was that at all an experience for you? Was there a transition in identity for you 10 years ago, and maybe it's evolved in the 10 years since?
There was a transition in state of mind, but I would have to say that falls short of a transition of identity. I still identify with the hemophilia community. I lived with it for more than half a century, and I'm living with the sequelae of it now. Since my liver transplant, I've had a knee replacement, I've had an ankle replacement, I've run into arthritic complications with other joints, and may require surgical intervention down the road. So all of the problems associated with bleeding into my joints are still with me. It's just that they're not bleeding anymore. The community is still my community. I identify with it. It's part of me. I don't feel like I have lost my identity within this community. I've just moved to a different plane.
Fair enough. Well, speaking of moving to a different plane, you've held a number of positions and titles professionally within the community over the course of your career. But I don't know if it's most recently anymore, the way you add titles to your life, but at least one of the newer ones includes being the VP of Medical for the World Federation of Hemophilia, something that took place in Glasgow last May during the World Congress. What is the role of VP Medical at WFH, and how has year one for you gone thus far? Or maybe about 9 months in now, how has it gone thus far?
This has been terrific. It's something I wanted to do since I joined the board a few years ago for the WFH, and I thought was the best application of my talents. It's a volunteer role, and it's best to describe it as essentially the volunteer chief medical officer for the foundation or the federation. And so we don't have a chief medical officer. We now have a medical director, Asad Hafar, who has run the Humanitarian Aid Program, was recently promoted to be the medical director of the WFH. And he's terrific and eminently qualified to do that. I'm handling all of the medical kinds of issues that arise, the strategy for promoting better treatment practices, even any treatment practices in some parts of the world, on behalf of all of the national member organizations. We have 140 national member organizations, and they all provide different levels of care, from the outstanding care we see in North America and Western Europe to really the absence of care in a number of places in Southeast Asia, Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa.
And with regard to the care in places such as those, I know that the Humanitarian Aid Program is a program that has held particular meaning to you for some time. You were part of the instrumental team that made the Biogen and Sobi commitment of 500 million IUs of factor available over 5 years to the WFH. Can you give a little perspective on what that donation meant to the program and to the community? I still don't know if the full appreciation for how grand a donation and moment that was. I don't know if that is appreciated at the level that that I think it ought to be, and perhaps how that has evolved the program since that 2015, so about 4 years in now. How has the program evolved as a result of that donation?
It has been a sea change for the humanitarian aid program. It got started in 1996 with small amounts of close to outdated factor, short-dated factor being donated by some of the pharmaceutical companies to the WFH. And so that was used primarily for emergencies, emergency surgeries such as intracranial hemorrhage, or the need for major corrective orthopedic surgery in situations where considerable life and limb damage had been done due to bleeding complications. And so it was important in its own right. But so much more could be done if we had the ability to have much larger quantities of factor. And so the quantities literally have increased more than 20-fold from. Actually, let me rephrase that. So the quantities have increased anywhere from 5 to 10-fold over the course of these last several years, thanks largely to the Biogen and Sobi contributions. Biogen spun off into BioVerativ. BioVerativ has recently been purchased by Sanofi, so it's now the Sanofi and Sobi contributions. Those contributions of 100 million units a year are now going to about 60 countries and have been joined by, this past year, an additional almost 100 million units of inconsistently donated product, not necessarily all prospectively donated, but nonetheless it can fill a lot of gaps in our program and allow us for the first time to have sufficient amounts of product in these countries to treat routine on-demand bleeding and to start to put children on low-dose prophylaxis. It's also enabled around 700 to 800 corrective surgeries, largely orthopedic surgeries, a year within these 60 or so countries, and so that's been really important too. If it changes how people see hemophilia in the 70% of the world that has had minimal to no access to clotting factor concentrates, because in the past, doctors would just throw up their hands, patients would throw up their hands and say, well, we have no treatment, we're just going to have to bleed. There's nothing we can do about that. That, of course, caused a lot of progressive joint damage and significant loss of life in these countries. Now we have the ability to treat. So I've been working with the local physicians and with the international community of physicians to go into a number of these countries and begin to reinforce good treatment practices, treat a bleed early, attempt to get children on prophylaxis to prevent the joint damage. All of the principles that we use here in the West and in Western Europe, which haven't been available to people in these 60 countries, are now beginning to be available. And so we need to reinforce those messages so that we can take full advantage of these donation programs. The other part of the donation, though, is to make the governments aware. The other part of the donation is to make the governments aware of hemophilia, of the power of treating hemophilia and the loss of life that can be prevented, to convince them to start buying smaller amounts of plasma-derived clotting factor concentrates, and eventually getting their population on prophylaxis. That's a long, long road to follow, but using this donation program, we can leverage it to make the government more aware and get them to start to commit more. and also to commit to education, training, and support of hemophilia treatment centers in these countries. Many of the countries we're in only have a single hemophilia treatment center, and that's not enough for the population. That means that the population has to travel, in some cases, great distances to get access to therapy.
When you have visited some of these places that the WFH's humanitarian aid program is serving, I'm curious, what has been one of the more surprising things that you've learned, either about the treatment and management of hemophilia in the country, the clinical practices, the advocacy efforts, the patient community, or the healthcare systems in general? I'm curious. You've traveled quite a bit for the WFH. What has stood out to you along the way?
Two things that have perhaps surprised me the most. One event occurred in the small town of Fez in Senegal. It's about 60 kilometers from the capital of Dakar. And we went out there to visit the group of patients that were out there. We had around 20 families represented at a meeting that was called. And they each went through their story. And the thing I remember the most is that every single family had lost at least one son. Accepting a situation and having a contentment about that situation, such that they can live life as best as possible, but in a peaceful way. It's very challenging, as we all know, to manage hemophilia. Whether you're managing a newborn or whether you were trying to manage it when I was a young child. But here, in the absence of treatment and the constant risk of death, I was amazed at how people coped in such a positive and proactive way with their lives. Those two kinds of impressions have really left me with a feeling of hope for the community. And so, what else can we do now if we can actually? What's the potential of the community if we can actually get treatment to patients and allow them to stay in school or even attend school, or think about getting a career or going to college? These are all the sorts of dreams that we all aspire to, but they're not the dreams that most of the world can even imagine.
So there was some recent news about a new partner to the humanitarian aid program, members of the Roche Group, Chugai and Genentech, who have committed to providing Hemlibra to as many as 1,000 patients with hemophilia A over the course of 5 years, with a focus on high needs patients. And it says here in the press release that I'm looking at the moment, high needs patients defined as people such as those with factor VIII inhibitors and children without factor VIII inhibitors. Is there anything more that you can tell us about that particular donation and why it is a significant announcement in addition to the humanitarian aid program?
Well, I'm very excited and pleased with the donation from the Genentech Chugai Roche Group. Emicizumab is a remarkable drug based upon the extensive clinical trials that have been done in the last 4 or 5 years. This drug can revolutionize how hemophilia is treated. Therefore, having access to it for some of the highest need patients, such as patients with inhibitors in the developing world, will make as much of a difference in their lives or more than it will in the lives of people in Europe and North America. And it's made a tremendous difference in the lives of people in Europe and North America. But we also have access to FIBA and we also have access to activated prothrombin complex concentrates as well as activated factor VII. They don't have access to that. So when patients with inhibitors in the developing world bleed, it becomes a life and death situation in each instance. And now we can at least begin to help some of these kids that have developed inhibitors along the way. We are also using the humanitarian aid donation of clotting factor to encourage immune tolerance therapy. We have sufficient amounts to be able to put children on immune tolerance therapy to see if we can eradicate their inhibitors. So that's another strategy that's being used to try to deal with this very difficult subset of patients who develop inhibitors.
And I've come to appreciate from the travels and the work that we've done with the WFH how often there's such energy and curiosity around what more can be done for the inhibitor population. The need here, as you were essentially repeating what you were just saying, but while the need in the U.S., Europe, and in developed countries for patients with inhibitors is still quite high, and it's a strong unmet need, it hardly compares to those in these countries without regular sustainable access and without access to the kind of treatments that you were referencing that are needed if you are dealing with an inhibitor. Are there ways in which you would like to see the humanitarian aid program continue to evolve from this point over the next, say, 4 or 5 years? Are there, in terms of the education that's done, the advocacy assistance, the actual chain of donated product, are there ways in which you'd like to see the program evolve?
Well, I would like to see additional companies come into the program. It's very inexpensive to make clotting factor, and the markups, the margins on clotting factors are very high. We all know that, and so it would be nice if other companies would give some consideration to the ethical dilemma that we have with the developing world, not ignore them, but embrace them and offer to help in some small fashion. I applaud the companies that have done that, BioVerativ, Sobi, now Genentech, Roche, as well as companies that have been contributing small amounts of clotting factors such as Grifols and CSL, along with the Korean Green Cross. So that's been helpful, but there are a number of other companies, including some of the major ones, that have not donated in a prospective fashion. They've helped in other ways, but these donations actually affect individual lives, and they make a difference. For the 18,000 people that we have on our donation programs around the world, it's been a huge impact on their lives, going from continuing to take steps backward to occasionally taking some steps forward. I think we all know what that's like in dealing with hemophilia. But for most of the world, it's only been steps backward. There have been no steps forward until we can get some clotting factor to patients. That also opens the door for advocacy, as I was discussing before, advocacy with governments to provide more support to the treatment centers and even to start buying some product, and educational training, education for the physicians and the nurses who are caring for these patients on the state-of-the-art treatment practices for hemophilia, as well as patient education, teaching patients how to recognize a bleed and try to treat it at its earliest possible time, or to the benefits of maintaining prophylactic therapy, difficult as that may be. So these are the kinds of I think, leveraged activities that the expanded humanitarian aid program has offered to patients around the world.
Is any part of you concerned that with the emergence of emicizumab, with other non-factor treatments being developed, and with gene therapy and its eventuality in hemophilia, if all continues to go as it appears to be, does any part of you grow concerned that factor donations will be, in fact, even harder to come by as these new forms of therapy reach the market?
No. There are more pharmaceutical companies making clotting factor now than ever before. And as I mentioned, the margins are high. That means the ability to reduce the price in order to increase market share goes part and parcel with the development of new markets for these clotting factors. So if anything, I'm encouraged by the development of emicizumab, some of these other non-clotting factor therapies that are in clinical trials now, to provide additional, perhaps donations, but also additional methods to treat hemophilia that will further expand the number of patients who can get it. This has happened in the past. We had plasma-derived clotting factor concentrates when the recombinants came out and pretty rapidly took over the developed world. The plasma-derived clotting factors went into less developed nations for the first time. And then as we moved into extended half-life products, more of the conventional factor replacement therapies have made it into other markets. Prophylaxis has increased. If we stop to think about the needs out there, we can't make enough clotting factor to be able to even provide for state-of-the-art treatment that we have in the United States and Western Europe, for instance, Canada, Australia, with full prophylaxis. If we think about the ultimate goal of full treatment for everybody with hemophilia, including those in the developed world, which means state-of-the-art treatment, it means prophylactic therapy, there are a couple of things to consider. The first is that there is not manufacturing capacity that could begin to accommodate the amount of clotting factor that would be needed. It's approximately 15 to 20 times more than what's made today. About 12 billion units of factor VIII is made per year today. We would be closer to 180 to 200 billion units required to provide full prophylaxis for everyone with hemophilia in the world. So that's not the solution. I think we can continue to make inroads to get limited prophylaxis to populations, to do a better job of on-demand treatment. That's all very important, but that's not going to be what solves the problem of hemophilia in the developing world. What will solve the problem for hemophilia in the developing world is gene therapy. Once and done, like a vaccine. That's the approach in the developing world that we need to be thinking about. Now you'll ask, how are you going to pay for that? Well, gene therapy at the moment is very, very expensive to be able to manufacture this drug product. But recombinant therapy was very, very expensive in the 1980s and is dropped to very inexpensive levels these days. So I think that further technology advancements are going to continue to drive down the price of AAV, adeno-associated viral vector production, which is the way in which the factor genes are being delivered in gene therapy. And we will need to identify collaborations, partnerships with agencies and governments that are willing to do a once-and-done treatment to eliminate hemophilia in their populations. This is the next chapter over the next 10, 15, 20 years that we need to be focused on at the World Federation of Hemophilia and as a global community.
So my last question for you, you mentioned earlier how that donation that we spoke of was from Biogen and Sobi, Biogen that then spun off into Bioverativ and has since been acquired by Sanofi Genenzyme. And we also spoke about the commitment from Roche, who recently is also in the news for having acquired Spark Therapeutics, who's working on gene therapies for hemophilia. There's always been a degree of shape-shifting, so to speak, on the industry side of the community and companies merging and acquiring. Is the amount of movement good? Is all of the acquisitions and the mergers and the partnerships, is this a good thing for the community, or is it something that should be a cause for concern, this much movement?
Oh, I think it's terrific for the community. We don't want the kind of oligopoly that we had in the 90s and 2000s, where a small number of companies controlled the entire marketplace for hemophilia. all that did was result in very high prices and a discouragement from being able to adopt prophylaxis for all, in part because of those high prices. At this point in time, you're absolutely right. There is tremendous flux in the marketplace with buying and selling and new companies coming in, almost commoditizing the conventional factor 8 and factor 9 markets. There are so many companies now, and they're dividing up a finite piece of the pie because the prices are still high enough that we still take patients down to this artificial 1% level, which still places them at risk. So if we really wanted to treat patients effectively, we would be giving them trough levels of 5 or 10%. That would take so much more factor. By bringing all of these other companies in and by providing multiple options for treating hemophilia, we are only encouraging better treatment practices, safer treatment practices, less risk of breakthrough bleeding. So this is all tremendous news. These non-factor replacement therapies, such as emicizumab and some of the others that are in clinical trials, they don't have troughs. So you've got a constant level. Gene therapy doesn't have troughs, so you have a constant level of factor. And that means that breakthrough bleeding should be minimized and really would only occur in times of extreme trauma where even a normal person might bleed, or in really severely damaged joints where you've got a lot of inflammation and blood vessels that may even bleed in a normal individual. That's how professional athletes get arthritis. They have the same kinds of bleeds we do. And after 15 or 20 years, their joints look very similar to ours.
I like any reference that puts me on par with a professional athlete. I think that's a great place to end any conversation. So with that, I will say, Glenn, thank you for joining us this morning, for telling us a bit about what's happening at the WFH and the Humanitarian Aid Program, as well as giving your perspective on some of the recent news and events in the community. I always appreciate talking to you, and I hope to do so again sooner than not.
My pleasure, Patrick. Thank you for an interesting conversation.
All right, I am joined now by the director of the Humanitarian Aid Program for the World Federation of Hemophilia, Dr. Asad Hafar. Asad, how are you?
Oh, I'm very well, Patrick. Thank you very much.
So, Asad, before we jump into World Hemophilia Day and the WFH's theme of outreach, identification, and diagnosis, I'm calling you from the Hemophilia Federation of America's Symposium in San Diego, but that is not the only event of interest to our community going on in North America at the moment. Can you tell listeners a little bit about what's wrapping up in Montreal?
Oh, yes. Today was the wrap-up of the second WFH Gene Therapy Roundtable, which started yesterday, Thursday, full day, and today it was half day. And it was really very interesting meeting. We had the first one last year in April, and this year was the second one. And the participants really appreciated why we went that way and we have this one. It's just the objective were to understand challenges to the field and to hemophilia, explore access models that advance the WFH vision for treatment for all, also identify unmet consistency-specific educational advocacy needs, and develop strategies to address this. And then we dug deeper into the gene therapy issues, and we spoke about how will we achieve our goal, and we discussed what happened last year, and for this year, what we were going to do. So, for example, where we are now in terms of gene therapy, what's coming, what is known in gene therapy, and what is an unknown. And when we talked about unknown, we have two things the really things that are unknown, which we don't know yet. But there are things unknown to us because we tend to forget them. And we try to really, in brainstorming, to address these issues and make sure that people remember the important things regarding the gene therapy.
I saw a tweet this morning from Brian O'Mahony, who is the CEO of the Irish Hemophilia Society, and I've gathered is one of the participants of this gene therapy roundtable. And the tweet included a slide that had a consensus statement of global access to gene therapy for all people with hemophilia, including people with hemophilia in the developing world. And I was very encouraged to see that at the top of this slide of consensus statements, that is being discussed, the importance of considering global access to gene therapy at this still early stage of wrapping our collective heads around gene therapy. Okay, so moving into World Hemophilia Day, April 17th. Every year since 1989 is World Hemophilia Day. This year, the WFH has the theme of outreach and identification. I'm a bit familiar with how the WFH considers outreach and identification from the work Believe Limited did on the outreach and identification in Indonesia video for the WFH as part of their Treatment for All web series, which you can watch at treatmentforall.org. But can you share with our listeners, how does the WFH think about outreach and identification and diagnosis, and why is that this year's theme?
You see, in fact, the theme of this year, which is identification and diagnosis, comes or goes hand in hand in the humanitarian aid donations of the WFH. And I would say it comes as the, let's say, the legitimate son or daughter of the humanitarian aid. And why is that? Because we experienced a lot of reluctance in the past from the hemophilia community and from the treaters. Why we are going to go and diagnose and identify more patients if we don't have the proper treatment for them. So what we are doing is identifying patients, but that is going to stop at that end because we have nothing to offer these new patients. And treaters felt frustrated because with every new patient you diagnose, you are putting more burden on yourself because you have no way to treat these patients. With the humanitarian aid donations in place, then these treaters can find and have the proper treatment for these new patients. And that's why they were much more enthusiastic in organizing and executing outreach program and the diagnosis program in order to diagnose new patients.
So, Asad, you mentioned how the factor donation, the increase of the factor donation to the humanitarian aid program enables more outreach and identification efforts because now these centers, these NMOs around the world and the treatment centers actually have factor to support the diagnosis and management of their hemophilia patients. So tactically, what are they doing? What are some of the outreach and identification tactics that have come about as a result of this newly inspired effort to find more patients?
Well, again, you see, with the humanitarian aid program, we managed to, let's say, develop new methods for outreach. And that would be to organize specific outreach program using the volunteers and the staff of hemophilia societies in one country, let's say, where they are going to move around in the country in organized campaign and go from one city to another or from one town or one village to another in order to do some kind of education and awareness for the people that might be suspected of having a bleeding disorder. They will go to local hospitals and talk with the local hospitals about hemophilia. So the people or the health professionals in these hospitals will start to think as hemophilia a possible diagnosis for a patient that they saw a week ago or 2 weeks ago that didn't happen to their minds at that mind that this person might have bleeding disorders. They have the address, they have the coordinates of this patient or this family. They are going to give it to the Hemophilia Society or the team who is doing the outreach. And then the team will go to this family or this patient and see if the case is really hemophilia or not. That's from one point of view. The other thing is If you have a patient, then there is the possibility that either the brothers of the patient, some cousins of the patient, the uncle of the patient, the brothers of his mother might have also hemophilia, which usually didn't happen in the past, that you draw the pedigree family and go to identify other patients. So you go, first of all, vertically up, and then you go horizontally and try to find other patients from that particular family. With this, when you go out and try to do this, you will find a lot of patients around. And these are the two methods that now are being used by hemophilia societies and healthcare workers in order to identify new patients. And just an example, in this meeting that we mentioned, the second WFH gene therapy roundtable, the principal treater of Senegal, Dr. Saliou Diop, who I think you know very well because we worked together 3 years back in Senegal, he just mentioned to me that through the outreach programs that we work together now, they managed to, last year only, 2018, to diagnose 30 new patients. And that's really very good because you see all these years, the Hemophilia Society of Senegal, they had between 140 to 150 patients. So in 1 year only, 2018, they diagnosed 30 new. So it's 20% of the total number. A huge achievement and a very good result.
You touched on this when you talked about the societies, but what role do the patients themselves play in spreading the word about hemophilia within their families and the communities? Can you talk a little more about the role the patients themselves play in outreach?
Right. So when we talk about the societies, the society usually it's parents and patients. So the patients themselves will go. And as you know, nobody really can identify and talk about hemophilia better than the patient himself. They know what they experience. They know how things is going with them, especially during the years when they didn't have any treatment. And now they can talk and give awareness to other people in a very better way. And what is more important is giving hope. Because in the past, they used to talk, but you couldn't give a real solution for the problem. Now we have, fortunately, we have some kind of hope and solution for the suffering of the patients with the treatment that we provide through the Humanitarian Aid Program.
What are the NMOs, the national member organizations, and the treatment centers that the program works with? What are they telling you about the challenges of getting new patients diagnosed right now? What tend to be the issues that they're struggling with most prominently?
There are few. In fact, it's good also that you asked this question because always when you start a new thing, there are always new challenges. And we need to identify these challenges, find solution for them, and make the challenge or change the challenge to be a successful story in order to let other people work on it. One of these, for example, the challenges is how to reach remote areas. One example is of this, how one society managed to overcome this. They had some kind of a donation from one of the big societies or big funders in the country and outside the country. So they bought a Ford van, and they painted the van with the logo of the society and the name Outreach for Hemophilia. And they used the van to go from one city to city, one village to village, and try to do identification. That is really good because it's not going to cost them a lot. It's just the gas for the car and some kind of accommodation when they go to certain cities where they need to stay for 1 or 2 nights, for example. And doing this for this campaign, I asked them, just tell me, please, briefly and honestly, how much did you pay, for example? First of all, I asked them, in the last year, how many patients did you diagnose or did you identify new in this campaign? They told me. How much did you the cost that you paid for to reach these patients and identify them. And taking these numbers, dividing them, each patient, in fact, costed between, let's say, $80 to $100. And that's really nothing for identification of one patient. Because why? We had the volunteers who are doing this on voluntary basis. We had the car, so the car is already included, just the cost of the gas, the accommodation, and the food. So that was really a fairly good price for identifying patients in Nigeria.
Have other areas used that? That sounds like a really effective. Very effective outreach and identification effort. Has that been picked up by places outside of Nigeria?
We are trying now to convince other countries and other societies to do like Nigeria did and try to, have a car like this and go from one city to one city. Because if we do this on a much larger scale, that is going to be also good as an advocacy tool for the government. Because what is better than having a car on it, you say, outreach for hemophilia, going around in the country in one city, and health professionals are going to see it, government officials, and they are going to see it. So they are going to start to see, okay, this is hemophilia, and there are some people doing excellent work for hemophilia. We need to get on that train and move with them.
Yeah, it's very visible, like you said, cost effective, and it forces people in positions of power and authority to confront hemophilia. It's literally driving around. So that's a really effective tactic. That's good to hear about. Have there been any initiatives or struggles from NMOs with regard to outreach and identification? Have there been things that haven't worked out so well, or challenges that are coming up again and again?
One other thing also, because when you identify some patients, or identify some people that they might have hemophilia, you need to bring these people to a lab in order to do the testing for the bleeding disorders and confirm if this person is hemophilia or not. And usually doing this, you will need a good lab, and doing the test, you will need reagents to do the test, and you need the lab to be much more equipped and have some kind of a good external quality control. So all these issues or all these factors are really going to affect the outcome. From our side, from the Federation, we try to provide the society with the reagents for doing the factor assay, for example, which is going to relieve them from the burden of paying for these reagents. So they might do some kind of a deal with the lab in order to tell them, listen, we are going to give you the reagents, which usually are, let's say, fairly expensive, and from your side, you are going to give us the expertise in order to do the analysis or the testing. And that also proved to be effective in some of the countries.
Yeah, the outreach and identification is one piece, right? But then the actual diagnosis does involve the lab testing and the reagents. There's a cost piece there. So it is kind of there's the outreach identification piece and then the diagnosis piece, and they kind of come with their own unique challenges, right?
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, if you don't have proper diagnosis, you are going to create a big number of people that are waiting for the diagnosis, and the diagnosis would be the bottleneck. So we need for sure to relieve the pressure on that bottleneck in order for the people to be diagnosed. And we have to make sure, are you a hemophilia patient or not?
So you told two great stories about Senegal's growth in diagnosing new patients, up about 20%, about Nigeria and the VAN outreach and identification initiative that's been successful there, maybe a model other places can use. Is there another story or two? I should know this, actually. First question is, how many countries is the humanitarian aid program actively involved in? And are there any other stories that, to you, are the quintessential reason that the humanitarian aid program exists, or anything you've come across in your travels recently, a story that has stuck with you?
You see, in the year 2018, we managed to donate 191 million units of factor concentrates, factor 8 and factor 9 to 62 countries. And among these 62 countries, there are really a number of countries that first of all of them, they are really doing great job, because we have identified volunteers who are the doctors who are treating, because we ask them also when they treat to report on the treatment that they do. And that's additional work for these volunteers, for the doctors. But really there are leaders and they are champions in doing this. But again, some of the countries, they are doing really well, like Zambia, for example, because they are taking the donation that we give them and put it as successful story with the Ministry of Health. And through these donations, they managed to have multiple meetings with the Ministry of Health, in which the ministry approved to establish a treatment center in the capital, Lusaka. And that was really very good. And they approved also, or they developed treatment guidelines that is going to be approved by the government. And hopefully in 2 months from now, in June, in the month of June, I will be visiting Lusaka with our regional manager for Africa, who is based in Nairobi, Kenya, in order to attend the official ceremony for having the treatment guidelines for Zambia. I mean, it's a small, let's say, celebration for that, but also always we have to take any incident like these as a model and try to duplicate it and do the same in other countries. And if we can manage to have treatment guidelines in most of the countries, that's going to be, again, an advocacy tool to advocate the government for better care, and at the same time, a stimulant for health professionals to continue the work with hemophilia.
Assad, I want people to be able to appreciate the schedule that you keep. How many countries, do you know how many countries you visited in 2018?
Oh, I really don't keep record of this. But, you know, what is really, what I really try is whenever I know that I'm needed, I will go there, even if I don't have time, or I will squeeze to go there. But in general, I would visit maybe between 12 to 15 countries every year in order to make sure that our donations are going well. The training that we provide is really well received. The treatment given by health professionals and treaters are up to the maximum and according to our guidelines, and the reporting is going well. And at the same time, we meet the patients, because really it's very important to feel that there are some organization, international organization, that they care for them. And that's really very important. I remember just 2 weeks back, we had, because, you know, we have our Facebook page, and the person responsible in the WFH about our Facebook page, he gave me something, came from a patient from Egypt, that he wrote, I need some help and all this. I said, okay, I'm going to call him. I just called the guy, and I said to him, listen, if you go to this center, we know the people. I'm going to talk to the people. They might be able to help you or give you some other. I'm talking to you from a distance on the phone, but I will advise you to go there and see this treater in this city, because he will be able to help you. And I'm going to let him know. And the next day, the person responsible for the page in the WFH, he showed me what that person did. He was thrilled. He said, thank you, I think, one by one, 5 times. Thank you. I was really happy to receive this call. You are really people who respect themselves and you respect the patients. I mean, at the end of the day, this is what we want to do. We want the patients to know that they are not alone by themselves. There are some people around the world that they are willing to help and they can help. And that's the message that we need to spread. And that's the message that we put on our poster or our slogan for our Hemophilia Day this year, which is the identification and diagnosis. So these two concepts, identification and diagnosis, are very important, but doing this by treaters or by health professionals or Hemophilia Society around the world, you are not by yourself. You have the WFH backing you up. Whatever support you need, you have to come to us, and we'll be happy if we can help you.
And are there any specific outreach, identification, diagnosis goals that the WFH or the Humanitarian Aid Program specifically have outlined for 2019? Are you trying to diagnose a certain percentage more patients? Are there any hard numbers that you're aiming for, or not necessarily?
Because we don't have, usually, as you know, we work through specific programs. So for this year, the identification and diagnosis are just a slogan for our Hemophilia Day. But by the end of the year, we'll be giving some kind of now solid programs that are going to be based on the identification and diagnosis. And then we are going to put some kind of a target number of countries and target number of patients that we would like to address this. And this is part of our strategic planning that we put for 3 years for starting 2018. So we usually have every year strategic planning. So we started our cycle now with 2018, 19, 20. So now we are just at the start in order to, let's say, build the playing ground for that. And then in the second half of the year, we are going to put the targets for this and go from there in identification new patients.
I want to make sure, as we're coming up on our time here, to give a shout out to the website that the WFH has launched for World Hemophilia Day, worldhemophiliaday.org. On that site, you can submit your story of how bleeding disorders have affected you and or your loved ones, as well as read stories that have been submitted from all around the world. I'm actually scrolling down the page right now, and we see Afghanistan, Tunisia, Romania, Greece, Chile, Australia, Iran, Canada, Mexico, Venezuela. So it's a neat opportunity to both share your story, but also to see the stories from all around the world. There's not really any other place where stories in this bite-sized format are captured and shared. So nice job doing that. And I would encourage listeners to go to worldhemophiliaday.org to, again, tell your story and read the stories of others. Asad, maybe as a closing thought, is there anything else related to the Humanitarian Aid Program's work that you would like listeners to be aware of as we reach this World Hemophilia Day?
I mean, first of all, I would like to congratulate all the hemophilia community around the world in celebrating Hemophilia Day, because it's a symbol of unity. That's what I see Hemophilia Day. It reflects that we are all having a common goal, or we share some kind of a work or a nature that bring us all together. That's my first message for the whole hemophilia community around the world. But at the same time, I would like to thank all the patients who are receiving our humanitarian aid program. Why? Because they waited for a long time for our expanded program to reach them. So in addition to they were suffering, they were patient also, until we came up with more donation that enabled us to reach more patients to help ease their suffering and to bring back the smile to their faces. And in this regard, I cannot forget the treaters who are doing and treating these patients using our humanitarian aid, because these also are what we say the soldat inconnu, the unknown soldiers who are really working day and night in order to serve the hemophilia community. So with all this, these are the people I would like to address, congratulate, and thank.
Well, congratulations to you as well, and to the Humanitarian Aid Program on its growth and on its success, on its ability to enable all of the great results and outcomes that it has generated. You've obviously had a large part to do with that as the director of the program for a long time now. So congratulations to you as well. And amidst your travels, I hope you do, amidst the travels and gene therapy roundtables and everything else keeping you busy, I do hope you find a little bit of time to get some rest in this spring as well.
That's right. I hope so. I hope so.
Okay. Thank you very much, Asad.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patrick. And also, before I leave, I would like to thank you also personally, because we worked together for many occasions now, in few occasions. And I've seen also how you care for the hemophilia community. I know you are a hemophilia patient, but that goes beyond also being a hemophilia patient. I feel that you have the heart to also help other people. So congratulations to you for the Hemophilia Day, and thank you for all the great work you are doing in the USA and around the world.
Well, thank you for that, and it's a pleasure to call you a colleague in the world of trying to make a difference. So thank you for that. Okay, thanks, Asad.
Thank you, Patrick.
Mama Sue's Netflix Rex is brought to you by Takeda. And for that we say, thanks Takeda. And thanks Mama Sue of Mama Sue's Netflix Rex, my mom, Susan Lynch, RN. Hi, Mom.
Hi, honey. How are you?
You know, one of the podcasts that I listen to and am a big fan of, the host recently had his mother on at the end of the episode to talk about what she's watching on the streaming services. And I thought, well, it's always nice to know that you're thinking along the same lines as the people you admire and model yourself after.
Oh, that's a riot.
We got some competition, though, in the podcaster mom streaming service recommendation department. So we got to really step up our game. I just wanted you to know that.
I'll do my best.
So what's the first of your 3 shows you want to talk about today?
Well, the one I watched most recently is called Dawn of Humanity. It's a National Geographic documentary on Netflix. And I found it quite interesting because, as we know, as many of us believe, we come from apes. And apparently there's been this 3 million year gap between the ape and the early humans, Homo erectus, which I think we all recognize that word when they first really became very human-like. So there was this 3 million year gap, and this group of anthropologists in South Africa, because of course the first humans were from Africa, they found a grave site quite accidentally. They found a grave site with many, many full skeletons in there that were millions of years old, from what they believe is that during that gap period. And they believe that these were the first crossover to Homo erectus, because they said what makes you human is cooperation and burying your dead and having cultural practices, and no other animals would at that point, or even I don't think they do it now either, literally dig and bury their skeleton, their dead. So this was quite an exciting find, and it was a great documentary watching the excitement of the explorers. And they said we'll never really know exactly what breed we came from because there was a lot of interbreeding going on. But just the artists portraying like these sculptures of how people evolved over the years, over the millions of years. It's just so interesting, and I think everybody would really enjoy it. I did.
What was one of the more unexpected things that you learned from the Dawn of Humanity?
Well, I would have to say the idea of burying their dead millions of years ago. I mean, I found that to be very interesting and surprising, and so did the explorers. That's what they said. That's a human thing. That's what humans do: bury dead people. Not animals don't do it. So I think it's a very good documentary. It's a National Geographic on Nova.
Says the Dawn of Humanity, and the second Mama Sue Netflix rec is also from Netflix this month. What's the second recommendation?
Stink is this was made a few years ago. It's called Stink, and it's really quite informative. We all know the store Justice. It tends to be a store that the young teenagers shop in. And this man who was left a widow with 2 young daughters, they ordered pajamas online from Justice, and they had a very foul smell when they got them out of the packaging, and they wouldn't wear them. And so the father did a bit of investigation trying to find out what chemical was on these, made in China. And he had some trouble finding out what was on these clothes. Apparently, the flame retardant that they put on them, which is all secret ingredients that you cannot find out. And he wound up, I don't think he sued the company, but he wound up going to meetings and meeting with the CEOs, and they didn't even know what was in these pajamas. And I think years later, after that, some of their jewelry was recalled for toxic chemicals. So I believe the store is still in existence. But, it's funny when you look at the back of a label on anything like a cleanser or a deodorant or a perfume, when it says fragrance, that could be hundreds of chemicals that are cancer producing. And they do not have to say what this fragrance is. So, and he was quite motivated because his totally healthy living wife in her low 30s got a very fatal form of breast cancer and died. And, he just doesn't, he feels it has to do with lifelong chemicals exposures. And he also looked up some studies where newborn babies have as much chemicals in their bodies as adults, which is frightening.
Say that again. What was that? What was that little bit of information? Say that one more time.
Newborn babies have as much chemicals in their systems as the adults do from being inside the mother. It crosses the placenta. And then apparently Europe is way ahead of us in banning many of these chemicals. We don't ban quite as much as they do, and China bans basically nothing. So when you buy your clothes or anything that's going on your body or in your body, you have to really, really do your own investigation. I mean, I understand the idea of flame retardant clothing for children, but it seems so many more people are dying from that flame retardant chemical than the people who die in their pajamas in fires. I don't know what the numbers are. So I think they started with these flame retardant materials back in the 60s. But now they're saying, maybe we should not be even using those retardants and just try to live safely. It said most house fires are from poor electrical or careless smokers or candles left on. So the takeaway is maybe we should just try to live more carefully and do away with a lot of the chemicals on children's clothing.
Yeah, and just keep them away from raging fires.
Right.
Keep the kids away from raging fires, like you said. How many kids are we losing to raging fires every year?
Right. So it was very good. I think they also mentioned like the Katrina trailers, all the plywood they used to make those were from China. And not only were the trailers falling apart shortly after they were built, but once again, when tested, had very, very strong chemicals in them that are cancer producing. So
it's a 2015 documentary. It played at 25 film festivals, won numerous awards, including Best Documentary at the Memphis International Film Festival, Best Environmental Film at the Cydonia International Film Festival, Best Environmental Feature at the Atlanta International Documentary Film Festival, and others. So it's been very well regarded with a rating of 89 on Rotten Tomatoes. Stink, if you want to depress yourself about your clothes and all the toxins that we're being exposed to and the fragrances in our lives, then you can watch Stink on Netflix right after Dawn of Man. And what's our third Netflix rec for the month of April, Ma?
Our third one is the Amanda Knox documentary, which I remember quite well. It was back in 2007. And this young girl, an American student from Washington State, was over in Italy for doing a semester abroad in a town called Perugia. And one of her roommates was found savagely murdered, and she was blamed for it and prosecuted and put in jail, was acquitted twice, went to Supreme Court. They put her back in, and it's really I remember it very well. It was so sensational, and the way she was treated, and the lead prosecutor was 100% from day one felt she did it. I remember wondering if she did it also. The belief of the police was that her boyfriend of 5 days, Raphael, and this other man called Rudy, who was just a casual friend, that they raped and murdered and bludgeoned this English girl who was also a student. And it just was very unbelievable to me. Like, why would she do that? Why would they do that? And it's very well done. It's very, the timeline is very clear. And she speaks during the documentary back and forth, and her whole life was really ruined. She was in jail over there for about 6 years altogether and finally got out. The Supreme Court finally overturned it because there was no DNA evidence that she was there, that her boyfriend was there. And it's really a case of, when you're wrongfully accused. I mean, this is why I don't believe in the death penalty, because, a lot of not a lot of mistakes, but mistakes can be made. And this girl did really suffer. It's quite a good documentary. I would recommend it.
Did it teach you anything kind of major about what was her name? The death of Meredith Kircher? Was that her name? It looks like Meredith Kircher.
Oh yes.
Was there anything revelatory about her? Did you learn anything kind of bold or new from the documentary?
Not about her really. Of course, her mother, is still quite devastated from the whole thing. This girl had a quiet life. This fellow Rudy, the belief is that he went in to rob the house and found her there, and he was on drugs and just went into some kind of a rage. It was not. They believe that he was actually there to rob, not to kill. But he wound up going to jail for dozens of years. But the thing that made them so suspicious of Amanda is when the police did come to the house, because she discovered the body. Police did come to the house. She was outside hugging and kissing her boyfriend and smiling. And, her reaction was not what you would expect. So what my takeaway is, if you should ever be around for a murder or something, be sure to sob uncontrollably, because everyone reacts differently. She was immature. She was probably high herself. And you can't say how someone should act. That really was what started the ball rolling against her, was her very flat reaction to the horror and kissing the boyfriend right outside the house. So
you can't say how you'll react to something, but you actually are recommending that people just sob hysterically in the face of
I do,
death.
just in case you become a suspect.
Good idea. Yeah, you want to build the case early. And that's on Netflix as well, right?
That's also on Netflix. So very, very good documentary.
Okay, so we have Amanda Knox, The Dawn of Man and Stink, kind of following in a little pattern of where do we come from, the origins of humankind and human babies and human beings, what's wrong with our health and the things that we're putting into our bodies, and big murder mystery cases. I'm noticing we have a little bit of a pattern on the show. What else is going on? Just before we say goodbye, anything else that you want to share with the listeners of this year podcast, of this year segment?
No, nothing else really. Just we're having a very nice spring here in New York right now, so I'm going to be going out in a little while to get a little taste of it.
It'll have happened by the time we air this on next Monday. But are you excited for the screening that in the real world is taking place next weekend, and in the listeners' world happened this past weekend?
Oh, I am so excited and so proud and so happy for you and the whole team. I can't wait to see it.
You want to know a fun little thing that we learned that people will have learned by the time this comes out, but we haven't mentioned it publicly yet, is that, so Alex Borstein is an executive producer, Susie on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It's one of the shows that you've recommended. Well, she and her kids and her friend are going to be at the screening.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wonderful. I'll be happy to meet her.
Yeah, so we can, you can let her know that you've reviewed the show on Mama Sue's Netflix Rex, and you can tell her all about it. I'm sure she would be really fascinated. All right, Mom. Well, thank you again. Thanks for sharing what you're watching with us. It's a fun segment. People continue to tell us they enjoy hearing what you have to say about the shows you're watching. So thanks for doing it. We'll talk to you again next month.
Okay, bye-bye.
Last and certainly not least, parting shots. One last item to leave the listeners with, bleeding disorders related or otherwise. Natalie, what is your parting shot?
No, I said you first.
You always go first, though. Don't you always go first?
No, we changed up.
We do?
Yeah.
I feel like you always go first.
Well, now we have to listen to every parting shot we ever.
No, we're not going to do that. All right, I'll go first. My parting shot this month, it's actually a two-parter, so I'm cheating a little bit. But again, having just come back from HFA, these conferences, you do a lot of walking around. It's always like a little funny how it's the meeting for all the hemophiliacs, and we're all just like limping all over the place, or people are scootering or wheelchairing, taking forever to get places, limping everywhere. It's quite funny, actually. And I was a little sore because I realized I haven't been walking so much recently. Like, I use our bike and I use my weights, but I'm actually like putting miles on my feet. It's not something I'm doing as much as I had been several months ago. But I got a lot of comments, as I often do, on my sneakers, my Fit Flops, as they're called, or Fit Flop sneakers. They are thin, They're very lightweight, but they have an actual like heel of substance. So there's some good solid cushioning for my arthritic ankles that the ultrasound, according to my physical therapist,
over 100 years old.
Over 100-year-old ankles. Decrepit was another word she used. I was like, oh, thank you. So my decrepit ankles have found success with these FitFlop sneakers because they have a nice sole, but they're also lightweight. You can move your feet in them real easy. There's nothing to them at all, and they pack really easily. So for the amount that I travel,
down, right?
yeah. So there's not much structure to the top of them. I don't know how to describe like the meshy, like what it's made out of exactly.
They also have ankle support. Like actually, they come up high. They're high rise almost.
So check them out. Fitflop.com.
Hashtag not an ad.
Not an ad. This is just stuff we use. So fitflop.com. I also have to mention, since she comes on every time, I get these from my mother because from a very young age, my mother has been concerned about what I wear on my feet. And at 33, she's still the person who primarily equips me with what I wear on my feet. So thanks, Mom, for finding FitFlops, and to other members of the community, other people who travel a lot or looking for a lightweight sneaker that also has some ankle support and a solid heel. Check out FitFlops. And along those lines, I just also wanted to acknowledge all the people who had something nice to say about BloodStream or the podcasts or the work in general that we do during HFA. And I don't always feel like I can receive those words as well as one might hope they'd be able to, or I don't know. It's hard to know how to receive people's nice words sometimes, but I want to say thank you, and to those who are listening to this and who have made mention of being a listener and discussing that with me. I really do appreciate it, and it's those kind of conversations that I think about when working on the outlines or reading another article or trying to drop files in the right place for the right thing. Get to be really frustrating. It's those little one-on-one moments with people where they tell you how the podcast served them in some way, shape, or form that give the boost to keep going. So thank you to everybody who took a moment to share something. And you're always welcome to reach out on social or to email info@bloodstreammedia.com if you want to give a shout out, say hi, suggest a topic. We do check those out, and they do really mean a lot. So thank you. And Natalie, what is your parting shot?
My parting shot is I've been traveling a lot for the last 2.5 weeks and haven't really been home. And it's now springtime, which is I just love the change in the seasons. Mm-hmm. And now that I live in California, it's not as pronounced, but it's nice to see that it does exist, even in a pretty consistent, temperate climate.
Yeah. But this year, especially, we felt the shift big time.
Yeah. Into the fall, it got cool and the leaves came down and into the spring. But I returned home and there's so much budding. And when I was in New York City, all the trees were budding. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just always... it really is a time of rebirth. And I know, Easter's coming up, and anyone who celebrates, Judeo-Christian holidays and Passover, but it's just like a really nice time of the year of rebirth and growth. And most excitingly, I thought we had killed our fig trees. We'd gotten them last fall, and I didn't know how fig trees work, that they lose their leaves, but they were looking real crazy all winter, and now they look beautiful, and there's actually fruit on them. And yeah, I'm excited, and I hope our listeners are enjoying the beauty of spring. That's my parting shot.
It's a beautiful parting shot, and I hope everybody is enjoying spring and all that it brings, the rebirth of spring. It's a welcome change. And with that is all for this episode. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, the World Federation of Hemophilia, Entertainment to Effect Change, the Hemophilia Alliance, and our presenting sponsor, Takeda, as well as our segment sponsors, breaking through the Ask the Expert podcast, Stop the Bleeding, the Teen Impact Awards, and the VWD series from Bloodline. We're keeping that in. Thanks as well to segments contributors, Debbie De La Riva, Dr. Glenn Pierce, Dr. Asad Hafar, Molly Livingstone, Amy Board, and Mama Sue Lynch. Hi, Mom. Subscribe to the BloodStream podcast and the Ask the Expert podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find BloodStream on Facebook.com/BloodStreamMedia, and on Twitter @BloodStreamInfo, and on Instagram @BloodStreamSomething. I never think to look that up. I have not yet added it to this script. So just go to Instagram and look up BloodStream Media, BloodStream Info. You'll find us if you want to. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on BloodStreamPod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Natalie Lynch.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.